There are stories out there, hidden in the shadows of America's past, that are more than just campfire tales. Legends born from fear, whispered across generations. And tonight we're diving deep into 5 of the most terrifying ones. But before we get too comfortable, hi, my name is Bon, your guide through the strange and the unknown. Together, we're about to uncover the dark corners of American folklore, where things that should be forgotten come to life. Ready? Let's begin. We thought the cold would kill us, until we heard something far worse in the trees. But I'm getting ahead of myself. There was no we. There was only me, alone in the vast, frozen wilderness of the Kawartha Highlands. And the other thing, the thing that hunted me. It all started on February 14th, Valentine's Day. The irony isn't lost on me, believe me. While everyone else was exchanging chocolates and roses, I was trudging through knee-deep snow, my heart as numb as my fingertips. Sarah had left me a week earlier, and I couldn't bear the thought of spending another minute in my empty apartment. So I packed a bag and headed north, telling myself I needed to reconnect with nature or some other bullshit excuse. The Kawartha Highlands stretched out before me, a white canvas of rolling hills and dense forests. It was beautiful in a desolate sort of way. I had planned for a day hike, but as the sun began to set, I realized I had grossly underestimated the terrain. And the cold. God, the cold. It seeped into my bones, made every movement a Herculean effort. Night fell fast, and with it came a bone-chilling wind that cut through my layers like they were tissue paper. I managed to set up my tent, but sleep eluded me. Every crack of a branch, every whisper of wind sounded like Sarah's voice, telling me again how she had grown apart from me, how she needed space. Well, I had found plenty of space out here, hadn't I? The next day was a blur of white. I tried to retrace my steps, but the landscape had transformed overnight. Everything looked the same, an endless expanse of snow and skeletal trees. As the second night approached, panic set in. I was lost. Truly, utterly lost. That's when the cold became a living thing. It wasn't just a sensation anymore, it was a presence. I could feel it watching me, circling me like a predator. My breath came out in frantic puffs of vapor, and I couldn't stop shaking. Was this how it would end? Would they find my frozen body come spring? Just another statistic of nature's cruelty. But as I huddled in my tent that second night, trying to will feeling back into my extremities, I realized the cold wasn't my biggest problem anymore. There was something else out there, something hungry. It started as a sound, a low, guttural moan that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I told myself it was just the wind, but deep down I knew better. The wind doesn't have footsteps. The wind doesn't breathe. I caught glimpses of it through the trees. A tall, emaciated figure moving with a speed that defied its gaunt frame. Antlers sprouted from its skull, stark against the moonlit snow. But it was the eyes that haunted me most. They glowed with an otherworldly hunger, fixed on me with an intensity that made my blood run colder than any winter chill. Wendigo. The word came to me unbidden, a half-remembered tale from childhood camping trips. A spirit of winter and famine, always hunting, always hungry. I had scoffed at those stories then. I wasn't scoffing now. It toyed with me, this creature of frost and famine. It could have taken me at any time, I'm sure of it, but it savored my fear, my desperation. It wanted me to feel the gnawing emptiness it felt, the insatiable hunger that drove it. As the third day dawned, I ran. I abandoned my gear, my provisions, everything that slowed me down. My world narrowed to the crunch of snow under my boots and the ragged sound of my own breathing. But always, I could hear it behind me. Sometimes closer, sometimes farther, but always there. I don't know how long I ran. Hours blended together in a haze of terror and exhaustion. My legs moved on autopilot, every step a miracle given how numb my body had become. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, couldn't take another step, I saw it. A glimmer of light through the trees. A cabin. Salvation. I burst through the door, slamming it shut behind me. An old man started at my sudden entrance, his eyes wide with shock. I tried to explain, to warn him, but my frozen lips couldn't form the words. As darkness took me, the last thing I heard was a long, mournful howl from the woods outside. I woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later. They told me I was lucky to be alive, that another hour in that cold and I would have lost fingers, toes, maybe more. The old man in the cabin had saved my life, they said. But they didn't believe me about the thing in the woods. How could they? To them, I was just another unprepared hiker who had a brush with death and hallucinated from hypothermia. Even I began to doubt my own memories as the days went by. That is, until the old man came to visit me. He didn't say much, just looked at me with knowing eyes and pressed something into my hand before leaving. It was a small, crudely carved figurine of a twisted, antlered creature.
Your protection,
was all he said. I've moved far away from the Kawartha Highlands now. I've tried to put that nightmarish experience behind me. But on cold winter nights, when the wind howls outside my window, I swear I can hear something moving out there in the darkness. Something hungry. Something that hasn't forgotten the taste of my fear. And I clutch that little figurine tight, praying it's enough to keep the cold hunger at bay. Every time I saw those glowing red eyes, someone died soon after. It's been 20 years since I left Cherry Falls, West Virginia, but the memories still haunt me. I'm Jessa McKinley, and this is the story of how I uncovered the truth about the Mothman, or at least as much of the truth as my sanity could handle. It was 2003, and I was working as a reporter for the local paper, the Cherry Falls Gazette. Nothing exciting ever happened in our sleepy town. Until the night of March 13th. That's when old man Guthrie called the police, babbling about a winged demon in his cornfield. I remember arriving at Guthrie's farm just after sunrise. The police had already left, dismissing it as the ramblings of a senile farmer. But something caught my eye, a section of corn, flattened in a perfect circle. In the center stood a single stalk, bent at an impossible angle.
it was right there.
Guthrie whispered, his eyes wide with fear.
All as a man, with wings black as night. But them eyes, Lord, them glowing red eyes.
I laughed it off, chalking it up to too much moonshine. But as I drove home, a shadow passed overhead. For a split second, I saw a silhouette against the moon, something distinctly not a bird. 3 days later, Guthrie's wife died in her sleep. Heart attack, they said, natural causes. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Over the next few weeks, more sightings poured in. A teenager swore he saw it perched on the water tower. A trucker nearly crashed his rig when it swooped across the highway. Each time, those glowing red eyes were mentioned. And each time, tragedy followed. A house fire claimed a family of 4. A sinkhole swallowed half of Main Street. The river flooded, destroying crops and livelihoods. Cherry Falls was being torn apart, and no one could explain why. I started digging, driven by a morbid curiosity I couldn't explain. There was no history of Mothman sightings in Cherry Falls, no local legends to draw from. This was something new, something terrifying. As I connected the dots, a pattern emerged. The sightings always preceded a disaster by exactly 72 hours. It was as if this creature, this Mothman, was a harbinger of doom. My editor thought I was losing it,
Jessa,
he'd say,
you're chasing fairy tales while real news is happening.
but I couldn't let it go. I interviewed witnesses, pored over police reports, and even consulted a cryptozoologist from the city. Then, on a cold April night, I saw it myself. I was driving home from a late-night interview when my headlights caught something in the road. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with massive wings folded against its body. As I slammed on the brakes, it turned. Those eyes. God, those eyes. They burned into my soul, 2 pinpricks of hellish red in the darkness. I blinked, and it was gone. 72 hours later, the old mill exploded. 5 dead, dozens injured. As I stood there watching the flames reach for the sky, I saw it again. Perched on the church steeple, wings spread wide, those eyes fixed on me. I ran. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. When I finally stopped, I was in the middle of Guthrie's cornfield, right where it all began. That's when I realized the truth. The Mothman wasn't causing these disasters. It was trying to warn us. But why? And why here, in Cherry Falls? I never got those answers. The next morning, I packed my bags and left town. I couldn't bear the weight of that knowledge, the responsibility of being the only one who understood. Now, 20 years later, I still see those eyes in my dreams. I wake up in a cold sweat, wondering if I did the right thing by leaving. Wondering if I could have saved more lives if I'd stayed. But here's the thing that truly terrifies me. Last night, as I was walking home from the grocery store, I saw a shadow pass overhead. For a split second, silhouetted against the moon, was something distinctly not a bird. I'm writing this now because I don't know if I'll be here in 72 hours. If you're reading this, please be careful. Watch the skies. And if you see those glowing red eyes, run. I swore I saw my brother, but the thing wearing his face wasn't him. Its movements were too fluid, too precise. Jake had always been clumsy, but this thing moved like a predator. We'd only been living on the ranch for 3 weeks when it all started to go wrong. Mom and Dad thought moving to the middle of nowhere would be good for us. A chance to reconnect as a family, away from the distractions of the city. What they didn't know was that they were dragging us straight into a nightmare. The night air was crisp when we arrived, early October bringing a chill to the desert that I wasn't expecting. Our new home was all adobe walls and creaking floorboards, surrounded by miles of scrubland and twisted juniper trees. It was beautiful, in a desolate sort of way, but something about it made my skin crawl from the moment we pulled up. Jake, my older brother, was the first to notice something was off. He kept saying he felt like we were being watched, even when we were inside the house. At first, I thought he was just trying to scare me and our little sister, Lily. But then I started feeling it too. That prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like a pair of eyes were boring into me. Dad brushed off our concerns, telling us it was just coyotes, or maybe a curious neighbor from miles away using binoculars. Mom seemed less certain, but she put on a brave face for us kids. I could see the worry in her eyes, though, especially when night fell and the desert came alive with sounds we couldn't identify. It was about a weekend when Jake and I decided to explore the far reaches of our property. We'd been warned not to go too far, but teenage curiosity got the better of us. As we walked, Jake told me about some of the local legends he'd been reading up on. Stories about skinwalkers, shape-shifting witches from Navajo lore who could take on the appearance of animals or even other people. I laughed it off, but Jake seemed genuinely freaked out. He kept looking over his shoulder, jumping at every rustle in the brush. That's when we found it, a small cave, hidden behind an outcropping of red rock. Against my better judgment, we went inside. The cave walls were covered in strange symbols, painted in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. In the center was a pile of bones. Some animal, some terrifyingly human looking. We ran out of there so fast I thought my heart was going to burst out of my chest. We swore not to tell Mom and Dad, but something changed in Jake after that day. He became withdrawn, spending hours alone in his room. When he did come out, he seemed different. His movements were off, his smile a little too wide. I tried to convince myself it was just the stress of the move, but deep down I knew something was terribly wrong. One night I woke up to the sound of the front door creaking open. Through my window I saw Jake walking out into the darkness, moving with an unnatural grace I'd never seen in him before. Without thinking, I followed him. The moon was full, casting long shadows across the desert landscape. I kept my distance, heart pounding as I watched my brother walk towards the cave we'd discovered. But as he got closer, something horrifying happened. Jake's form began to shift and twist, his limbs elongating, his skin seeming to rot away before my eyes. What turned to face me wasn't my brother anymore. It was a monster with glowing eyes and a mouthful of razor-sharp teeth. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life, tears streaming down my face as I burst into the house, screaming for my parents. They didn't believe me at first, but the look of terror on my face must have convinced them something was wrong. Dad grabbed his shotgun, and we all piled into the car. As we sped down the dirt road leading away from the ranch, I saw something loping alongside us in the darkness. For a split second, it turned its head, and I saw Jake's face, distorted and wrong, grinning at me with too many teeth. We never went back to that ranch. Mom and Dad told the police some story about coyotes or mountain lions, but I know they saw something that night that changed them forever. We don't talk about it much, but sometimes I catch them looking at Jake, the real Jake, with a mixture of relief and lingering doubt. I don't know if what I saw that night was really a skinwalker, or if there's some rational explanation for it all. But I do know this. There are things out there in the dark, wearing familiar faces, that are anything but human. And sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones that look just like us. Feeling the chills yet? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button if you're ready for more. Now, let's get back to the tales. Once the curse took hold, I was no longer my own, only the beast inside. The bayou's inky waters reflected my monstrous form, a twisted mockery of the man I once was. But let me start at the beginning, before the curse of the Rougarou consumed my life and tore my family apart. My name is Jean-Baptiste Thibodeau, and I was born and raised in the swamps of Terrebonne Parish, Louisiana. Fishing was in my blood, passed down through generations of Cajun ancestors who wrested their living from these murky waters. I thought I knew every secret these bayous held, but I was wrong. So terribly wrong. It began on a moonless night in late October. The air was thick with the scent of decay and wood smoke as I navigated my pirogue through the maze like channels of bayou cane. My flashlight caught something in the water, a shape that didn't belong. As I leaned in for a closer look, a hand, pale and bloated, broke the surface and latched onto my wrist. I recoiled, nearly capsizing the boat. The thing in the water thrashed, and I caught a glimpse of matted fur, yellow eyes, and teeth. So many teeth. In a panic, I grabbed my fishing knife and hacked at the creature's arm until it released me with an inhuman howl. As I sped back to shore, my heart pounding, I noticed teeth marks on my forearm, already swelling and turning an angry red. By the time I stumbled into my house, I was burning with fever. My wife, Marie, tried to take me to the hospital, but I refused. Something deep inside told me this was no ordinary bite. For 3 days, I writhed in agony as the fever raged. Marie tended to me, her eyes wide with fear as she whispered prayers and pressed cool cloths to my forehead. Our children, Emile and Adeline, hovered at the edges of the room, their faces pale with worry. On the third night, as the full moon rose over the bayou, the change came upon me. It felt like my bones were liquefying. reshaping themselves beneath my skin. Muscles tore and regrew, stronger and denser than before. I screamed, the sound twisting into a feral howl as my face elongated into a muzzle filled with razor-sharp teeth. Marie's scream pierced through the haze of pain. I saw myself reflected in her terrified eyes. A monster, 8 feet tall, covered in coarse fur matted with swamp mud. My clothes lay in tatters around me, and an overwhelming hunger gnawed at my insides. With a roar that shook the windows, I burst through the front door and loped into the night. The cool air carried 1,000 scents. Fear, prey, blood. My human mind was there, but buried deep beneath primal instincts I couldn't control. That first night is a blur of violence and terror. I remember the coppery taste of blood, the crunch of bones between my jaws, the thrill of the hunt. When dawn broke, I found myself naked and shivering in the swamp, surrounded by the mangled remains of wildlife. And worse. I stumbled home, sick with guilt and fear. Marie was waiting, a shotgun trembling in her hands.
"What are you?"
She whispered, tears streaming down her face. I told her everything. The creature in the bayou, the bite, the transformation. As the words spilled out, I saw understanding dawn in her eyes, followed by a steely resolve.
"The Rougarou."
She breathed.
"My grandmere used to tell stories. I never believed."
Over the next month, we searched desperately for a cure. Marie reached out to every traiteur and voodoo practitioner in southern Louisiana, while I pored over dusty tomes of folklore in the parish library. But as the next full moon approached, we knew we were running out of time. The night of my second transformation, Marie locked me in our storm cellar. The children huddled in the attic, told to stay quiet no matter what they heard. As moonlight filtered through the cracks, the change took me once more. I don't know how long I raged in that cellar, throwing myself against the walls and door with inhuman strength. But sometime before dawn, my bestial mind figured out how to work the latch. I burst free, hungry for flesh and blood. I remember Marie's scream, the boom of the shotgun. Buckshot tore into my shoulder, and I howled in pain and fury. Through a red haze, I saw Emile pushing Adeline behind him, his young face a mask of terror and determination. Something in me broke at that moment. The human part of my mind clawed its way to the surface, fighting against the monster's hunger. With every ounce of willpower I possessed, I turned and fled into the swamp. When I came to myself the next morning, I knew I couldn't go home. I was too dangerous, too unpredictable. I left a note for Marie, telling her to take the children and leave, to forget about me. Then I ventured deep into the bayou, determined to isolate myself from humanity. For months, I lived like an animal, letting the Rougarou take control during the full moon and retreating to hidden caves and abandoned fishing camps during my lucid periods. But the guilt ate at me, and the loneliness was maddening. It was Marie who found me 6 months after that terrible night. She had been tracking the Rougarou's movements, following stories of a beast in the swamp. When she saw me, filthy, half-starved, more animal than man, she didn't flinch. She simply held out her hand and said,
"Come home. We'll fight this together."
I wish I could say there was a magic cure, some mystical ritual that broke the curse. The truth is messier, harder. We found ways to manage my transformations, using heavy chains and reinforced rooms. Marie and the children learned to defend themselves, to be both my jailers and my saviors. It's not an easy life. Every full moon is a battle between man and beast. But in fighting this curse, I found a strength I never knew I had. And in the unwavering love of my family, I found redemption. The Rougarou is still a part of me, a shadow that will never fully leave. But it no longer controls me. I am Jean-Baptiste Thibodeau, fisherman, husband, father, and I am more than the beast inside. Whatever was killing our cattle was not from this world, and it was coming for us next. I'd lived on this ranch my entire life, watched my father tend to these same fields, but nothing could have prepared me for the terror that descended upon us that summer. It began with the goats. We found them in the morning, lifeless husks strewn across the pasture. Each carcass bore twin puncture wounds on the neck, drained completely of blood. No predator we knew could have done this. I remember the fear in my wife Maria's eyes as she clutched our youngest, Sophia, to her chest. Our other 4 children huddled around her, their usual laughter replaced by an eerie silence. Even Diego, our eldest at 17 and usually so eager to prove himself a man, looked pale and shaken. "It's just a coyote." I lied, more to convince myself than them. But deep down, I knew. The stories my grandfather used to tell around the fireplace came flooding back. Tales of a beast that stalked the night, thirsting for blood. El Chupacabra, he called it. I'd always dismissed them as superstition, but now, days passed, and the attacks continued. Chickens, pigs, even our prized bull. Nothing was safe. We set up floodlights, patrolled the grounds at night, but it was like trying to catch smoke. Always one step behind, always too late. The financial toll was crushing. With each dead animal, our livelihood bled away. I could see the worry lines deepening on Maria's face, hear the hushed arguments between Diego and his siblings about whether to abandon the ranch. But this land had been in our family for generations. I wouldn't let some creature drive us away. It was on the night of the new moon that everything changed. The darkness was absolute, our floodlights cutting thin swaths through the inky blackness. I was making my rounds, shotgun in hand, when I heard it. A low, guttural growl that made my blood run cold. I swung my flashlight toward the sound and froze. There, at the edge of the beam, stood a creature straight out of a nightmare. Small, no larger than a coyote, but unmistakably alien. Its skin was a sickly green, covered in scales that glinted in the light. A row of spines ran down its back, quivering as it moved. But it was the eyes that haunted me. Glowing orbs of sickly yellow-green that fixed on me with predatory intelligence. For a moment we stood there, locked in a primal standoff. Then it moved, faster than anything I'd ever seen. I fired, the boom of the shotgun shattering the night's silence. But the creature was gone, melting into the shadows with inhuman speed. The commotion brought Diego running, his own rifle at the ready.
"Papa, what happened?"
I couldn't find the words to describe what I'd seen. How could I tell my son that the monster from his childhood nightmares was real? The next few nights were a blur of sleepless vigils and jangled nerves. We huddled in the house, windows barred, jumping at every sound. I could see the toll it was taking on my family. Little Sophia wouldn't sleep unless one of us was holding her. Even Maria, usually our rock, had taken to clutching her rosary, muttering prayers under her breath. It was Diego who came up with the plan.
"We can't keep living like this, Papa."
He said, eyes burning with a determination that made him look so much like my father.
"We need to end this."
And so, on the 7th night, we set our trap. We let one of our remaining goats out into the pasture. Bait for our supernatural predator. The family huddled inside, doors locked, while Diego and I took up positions on opposite sides of the field, rifles loaded with every kind of ammo we could think of. Hours crawled by. The moon rose, bathing the land in pale light. And then, movement. A shadow detached itself from the darkness, slinking toward our sacrificial goat. I raised my rifle, heart pounding so loud I was sure the creature would hear it. It happened in an instant. The beast lunged impossibly fast. The goat bleated once, a terrified sound cut short. And then 2 shots rang out in perfect unison. Diego and I, our timing honed by years of hunting together. The creature jerked, an unearthly shriek tearing from its throat. It whirled, those glowing eyes finding me in the darkness. For a heartbeat, I was sure it would charge, that this would be my last moment on Earth. but then it staggered, dark ichor oozing from 2 wounds in its side. With one last baleful glare, it turned and fled into the night. We never saw the creature again after that night. Some might say we imagined it all, that it was just a particularly clever coyote or a mountain lion driven to desperation by drought. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, on dark nights when the wind howls just right, I swear I can hear that unearthly growl in the distance. Our ranch recovered, slowly but surely. We rebuilt our herds, mended our fences, both literal and emotional. But something had changed. We no longer took the night for granted, no longer dismissed the old stories as mere superstition. Because now we knew the truth. The monsters of legend aren't confined to campfire tales and children's nightmares. Sometimes they're all too real, and when they come, all you can do is stand your ground and fight for what's yours. And there you have it. 5 terrifying tales that remind us some legends refuse to die. But the truth is, there's always more lurking in the dark corners of American folklore. If you want to hear more stories like these, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment about the folklore that haunts you. There's always room for another tale here in the abyss. Until next time, stay curious.